Yes, I thought it's very interesting. Just before the class, realizing that Sthiranaga had a very similar perspective, and I've got my dictionary definitions ready as well, so I'm not going to bother with them because you've heard them now. And I think it's interesting. The realization I think I had is also connected to the three lakshanas, but it's actually more about unsatisfactoriness. It's more about the dukkha that we're experiencing. So just challenging the idea that life has become more unmanageable, or we're less in control, and echoing what Sthiranaga said in that we weren't in control anyway. And it's all arising independence on conditions. So it's a huge amount of delusion to think that we were in control, and you know, this idea of returning back to some sort of normal is also just a huge delusion, actually. So resting with dukkha, and kind of using that now for my sort of the focus for how I'm practicing, how I'm living my life. Obviously a number of us are having an experience of dukkha, so actual suffering that we're experiencing now. But there's also parinama dukkha, which is the dukkha of not, it's that stored dukkha. So it's thinking that we're going to run out of toilet rolls, not being able to get that slot with the supermarket. So those things are in the future, and we can easily allow ourselves to be sucked into that and start experiencing that kind of dukkha. So I can see why it starts to feel like a crisis for many of us. But actually it's just coming into relation with how things are in our conditioned existence. And one thing that we do know about dukkha, of course, is that independence on dukkha, shraddha arises, so faith arises, and we get to move into the spiral path. So off of the wheel, away from those poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion that power that wheel, and into spiral augmented conditionality. So for me, this opportunity is, I think Eddie mentioned it, it's a great opportunity to practice. So we can really see the nature of our conditioned existence, see the three lakshanas. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what practice means to me. So what does that actually mean? And what am I doing? So one of the things that I'm very aware of currently is my own mental states. And I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about how I watch and I'm aware of my own mental states and what I do with them, but also watching my tendencies, so my samskaras, my habitual patterns of behavior. So one of those is busyness. So I can very easily turn away from experience of dukkha by making myself incredibly busy. So as Sthiranaga said, he was away at Padmaloka when the decision had to be taken to close the centre, and very rapidly we managed to get all of our classes up online. So that gave me a focus, and still to a certain extent gives me focus to be busy. So I have to be careful with that, and I have to balance that, and I'll talk a little bit about how I kind of balance that. The other thing, of course, for me, of one of my habitual tendencies is when I'm busy doing something, particularly if I'm leading something, I like to do it my way. And that my way is based on my personal experience of how things have been, how I've judged them to be successful in the past. And that tends to create a view of how things should be. So I start to create these views of how we should do these classes online, and how another classic is how to interpret the advice and guidance from the government. So like Sthiranaga, I'm keeping a sort of an eye on what's being said. from a social sort of context and a government context, but it's very easy to crystallize and firm that up into, well, this is how you interpret the advice. And I've had a couple of experiences early on when I've got into difficulty and conflict, particularly with older people, shall I say, relatives, should I add, that interpret that advice in a different way. But actually, they're just views. They're just my views. They're not real views. They're false views. So letting go of those and not watching to make sure that they don't crystallize. So setting up the right conditions to practice is something I wanted to say something about. So that's really important, particularly at this time for me. So two ways of looking at that: external and internal. So externally, it's about staying connected with others. So I do get a lot out of these sessions, the morning meditations, where we're tuning in and seeing some familiar faces, but also keeping close with my chapter, with my spiritual friends, my Kalyana Mitratars, my Kalyana Mitras, being around for others that I know are suffering and struggling, but connecting with nature as well, connecting with the wider environment. And for me, I need to keep quite grounded. So I need to keep, for a long time, I've sort of worked with prapancha and don't often have lots of prapancha, but that thinking, that repetitive cycle of thinking can creep in if I'm not keeping grounded. So I'm doing a lot of body awareness. So I'm doing a lot of qigong. I've started doing more Tai Chi than I've done for a long time. So keeping up that those sort of ways of engaging my body and bringing my awareness into my body. The other thing that I've been doing is just reading a tiny bit of Dharma. So I'm reading a fascinating book called Sailing Home, which Sthiranaga has lent me, by a Zen priest, American Zen priest called Norman Fisher, and it's about Homer's Odyssey and how he's drawn lessons from there about the sort of perils of and pitfalls of life, and the spiritual life in particular. And so it's fascinating, but I just read probably 2 or 3 pages of an evening. And I did have this really fleeting idea that I could really start. This is a great opportunity to, really read the whole of Bante's back catalogue. The collected works. I could work my way through them. And then I realized, as Sthiranaga pointed out earlier, that actually probably the most the least effective thing that I can do at the moment is actually to learn more Dharma, to take on more knowledge of the Dharma. What I actually need to be doing now is practicing what I actually know, and not just a little bit of practice. And I don't mean meditation practice on its own. I mean actually practicing what I know, and putting that into action. So that's that's key to me right now, is to put practice at the front and center of what I'm doing. So I'm not taking on more Dharma, I'm not reading lots, I am really just trying to put into action what I already know. So internally, setting the right conditions, that means for me reminding myself constantly of my continuity of purpose. So what is my life about? What am I doing with my life? And my life now is, well, it is a commitment to the 3 jewels. It's going to refuge to the 3 jewels, but I'm on a path to awakening. That's what I'm doing. So all the rest, all of the conditions that get set up, whether it's the normal run-of-the-mill conditions or whether it's something like this COVID pandemic, they are just incidental and they are just noise. And I must try and just allow that noise to settle and just carry on with my focus. So what's important for me is being aware of my mental events. And I need to be aware of some of the negative mental events, the upakleshas that I can drift into. So unmindfulness, forgetfulness, so inattentiveness, opinionatedness, they're just 3 of the 20 negative emotions, the upakleshas, which are defined within the Abhidharma, which emerged around about the 3rd century BCE. And they can easily lead into stronger negative emotions like resentment. Gloominess is one that I can fall into. Laziness. So some of you might think laziness doesn't really apply to me, but if I start to become gloomy and I start listening to my own fake news, my own negative stories, then I can easily start to think, well, there's no point in anything, and get quite lazy. So that's the kind of negative mental states that I can see arising in my experience. So I try to work with the positive ones. So the really important ones for me are faith, shraddha, hri, which is like shame or self-respect, non-attachment, and non-hatred. So they're the important ones that I'm trying to work with. How do I work with all those? I use the 4 right efforts. So trying to cultivate the arising of wholesome mental states, trying to maintain those mental states when they've arisen, eradicating those unwholesome mental states, and preventing them from arising as well. So that going for refuge, that path of practice is not an easy one. And Sthiranaga gave a great talk yesterday in the class about the 3 jewels, and he described them as being it's difficult. So going for refuge is difficult, and it's not, for me, it's not without pain, it's not without difficulty. But I need to just stay close to the 3 lakshanas. So those very 3 important marks of conditioned existence. And the more I kind of challenge my fake news, so the more which is created by that sense of self, that ego, the more I challenge that and realize that it is fake, the more painful that is. And that can be quite painful. But I know that that's the only way that I will make real progress, the real progress that's worth making. So some days I might tune in and it looks like I'm having a bad day, and it looks like I'm a little bit miserable, I'm a little bit down, but actually, as long as that's a result of me challenging my sense of self and those false views, then actually those days are actually small victories in the long path towards more and more glimpses of the truth and more glimpses of reality. So I guess my conclusion really is, I don't need any more knowledge. I just need to practice. Practice is everything. Everything is practice. And that's my time.